Hey guys, we are finishing Second Maccabees today. We have 5 chapters to get through, and then we'll start Third Maccabees next after that. Okay, here we go. All right, Second Maccabees chapter 10. Now Maccabeus and his followers, the Lord leading them on, recovered the temple and the city. They tore down the altars that had been built in the public square by the foreigners, and also destroyed the sacred precincts. They purified the sanctuary and made another altar of sacrifice. Then, striking fire out of flint, they offered sacrifices. After a lapse of 2 years, and they offered incense and lighted lamps, and set out the bread of the presence. When they had done this, they fell prostrate and implored the Lord that they might never again fall into such misfortunes, but that if they should ever sin, they might be disciplined by him with forbearance and not being handed over to blasphemous and barbarous nations. It happened that on the same day on which the sanctuary had been profaned by the foreigners, the purification of the sanctuary took place, that is, on the 25th day of the same month, which is Chislev. They celebrated it for 8 days with rejoicing, in the manner of the festival of booths, remembering how not long before, during the festival of booths, they had been wandering in the mountains and caves like wild animals. Therefore, carrying ivy-wreathed wands and beautiful branches, and also fronds of palm, they offered hymns of thanksgiving to him who had given success to the purifying of his own holy place. They decreed by public edict, ratified by vote, that the whole nation of the Jews should observe these days every year. Such then was the end of Antiochus, who was called Epiphanes. Now we will tell what took place under the Antiochus Eupator, who was the son of the ungodly man, and will give a brief summary of the principal calamities of the wars. This man, when he succeeded to the kingdom, appointed on Lysias to have charge of the government and to be chief of governor of Syria and Phoenicia. Ptolemy, who was called Macron, took the lead in showing justice to the Jews because of the wrong that had been done to them, and attempted to maintain peaceful relations with them. As a result, he was accused before Eupator by the king's friends. He heard himself called a traitor at every turn because he had abandoned Cyprus, which Philometor had entrusted to him, and had gone over to Antiochus Epiphanes. Unable to command the respect due his office, he took poison and ended his life. When Gorgias became governor of the region, he maintained a force of mercenaries, and at every turn kept attacking the Jews. Besides this, the Dumeans, who had control of important strongholds, were harassing the Jews. They received those who were banished from Jerusalem and endeavored to keep up the war. But Maccabeus and his forces, after making solemn supplication and imploring God to fight on their side, rushed to the strongholds of the Idumeans. Attacking them vigorously, they gained possession of the places and beat off all who fought upon the wall, and slaughtered those whom they encountered, killing no fewer than 20,000. When at least 9,000 took refuge in 2 very strong towers, well equipped to withstand a siege, Maccabeus left Simon and Joseph, and also Zacchaeus and his troops, a force sufficient to besiege them, and he himself set off for places where he was more urgently needed. But those with Simon, who were money hungry, were bribed by some of those who were in the towers, and on receiving 70,000 drachmas, let some of them slip away. When word of what had happened came to Maccabeus, he gathered the leaders of the people and accused these men of having sold their kindred for money by setting their enemies free to fight against them. Then he killed these men who had turned traitor, and immediately captured the 2 towers. Having success at arms in everything he undertook, he destroyed more than 20,000 in the 2 strongholds. Now Timothy, who had been defeated by the Jews before, gathered a tremendous force of mercenaries and collected the cavalry from Asia in no small number. He came on intending to take Judea by storm. As he drew near, Maccabeus and his men sprinkled dust on their heads and girded their loins with sackcloth in supplication to God. Falling upon the steps before the altar, they implored him to be gracious to them and to be an enemy to their enemies and an adversary to their adversaries, as the law declares. In rising from their prayer, they took up their arms and advanced a considerable distance from the city, and when they came near the enemy, they halted. Just as dawn was breaking, the 2 armies joined battle, the one having as pledge of success and victory not only their valor, but also their reliance on the Lord, while the other made Rage their leader in the fight. When the battle became fierce, there appeared to be the enemy from heaven 5 resplendent men on horses with golden bridles, and they were leading the Jews. 2 of them took Maccabeus between them, and shielding him from their own armor and weapons, they kept him from being wounded. They showered arrows and thunderbolts on the enemy, so that, confused and blinded, they were thrown into disorder and cut into pieces. 20,500 were slaughtered, besides 600 cavalry. Timothy himself fled to a stronghold called Gazara, especially well garrisoned, where Chereas was commander. Then Maccabeus and his men were glad, and they besieged the fort for 4 days. The men within, relying on the strength of the place, kept blaspheming terribly and uttering wicked words. But at dawn, on the 5th day, 20 young men in the army of Maccabeus, fired with anger because of the blasphemies, bravely stormed the wall, and with savage fury cut down everyone they met. Others who came up in the same way wheeled around against the defenders and set fire to the towers. They kindled fires and burned the blasphemers alive. Others broke open the gates and let in the rest of the force, and they occupied the city. They killed Timothy, who was hiding in a cistern, and his brother Chereas and Alphanes. When they had accomplished these things with hymns and thanksgivings, they blessed the Lord, who shows great kindness to Israel and gives them the victory. All right, 2 Maccabees chapter 11. Very soon after this, Lysias, the king's guardian and kinsman, who was in charge of the government, being vexed at what had happened, gathered about 80,000 infantry, all his cavalry, and came against the Jews. He intended to make the city a home for Greeks, and to levy tribute on the temple as he did on the sacred places of the other nations, and to put up the high priesthood for sale every year. He took no account whatever of the power of God, but was elated with his 10,000s of infantry and his thousands of cavalry and his 80 elephants. Invading Judea, he approached Bethzer, which was a fortified place about 5 stadia from Jerusalem, and pressed it hard. When Maccabeus and his men got word that Lysias was besieging the strongholds, they and all the people, with lamentations and tears, prayed the Lord to send a good angel to save Israel. Maccabeus himself was the first to take up arms, and he urged the others to risk their lives with him to aid their kindred. Then they eagerly rushed off together. And there, while they were still near Jerusalem, a horseman appeared at their head, clothed in white and weapons of gold. And together they all praised the merciful God and were strengthened in heart, ready to assail not only humans, but the wildest animals of walls of iron. They advanced in battle order, having their heavenly ally, for the Lord had mercy on them. They hurled themselves like lions against the enemy and laid low 11,000 of them and 1,600 cavalry, and forced all the rest to flee. Most of them got away stripped and wounded, and Lysias himself escaped by disgraceful flight. As he was not without intelligence, he pondered over the defeat that had befallen him, and realized that the Hebrews were invincible because the mighty God fought on their side. So he sent to them and persuaded them to settle everything on just terms, promising that he would persuade the king, constraining him to be their friend. Maccabeus, having regard for the common good, agreed to all that Lysias urged, for the king granted every request in behalf of the Jews, which Maccabeus delivered to Lysias in writing. The letter written to the Jews by Lysias was to this effect: Lysias, to the people of the Jews, greetings. John and Absalom, who were sent by you, have delivered your signed communication and have asked about the matters indicated in it. I have informed the king of everything that needed to be brought before him, and he has agreed to what was possible. If you will maintain your goodwill toward the government, I will endeavor in the future to help promote your welfare. And concerning such matters and their details, I have ordered these men and my representatives to confer with you. Farewell, the 148th year, Dioscorinthius 24th. The king's letter ran thus: King Antiochus to his brothers Lysias, greetings. Now that our father has gone to the gods, we desire that the subjects of the kingdom be undisturbed in caring for their own affairs. We have heard that the Jews do not consent to our father's change to Greek customs, but prefer their own way of living and asked that their own customs be allowed them. Accordingly, since we choose that this nation also should be freed from disturbance, our decision is that their temple be restored to them and that they shall live according to the customs of their ancestors. You will do well, therefore, to send word to them and give them pledges of friendship, so that they may know our policy and be of good cheer and go on happily in the conduct of their own affairs. To the nation, that the king's letter was as follows: King Antiochus, to the Senate of the Jews and to the other Jews, greetings. If you are well, if it is desired, it is as we desire. We also are in good health. Menelaus has informed us that you wish to return home and look after your own affairs. Therefore, those who go home by the 30th of Xanathicus will have our pledge of friendship and full permission. For the Jews to enjoy their own food and laws just as formerly, and none of them shall be molested in any way for what may have been done in ignorance. And I have also seen Menelaus to encourage you. Farewell, the 148th year, Xanthicus 15th. The Romans also sent them a letter which read thus: Quintus Memmius and Titus Manius, envoys of the Romans, to the people of the Jews, greetings. With regard to what Lysias, the kinsman of the king, has granted you, we also give consent. But as to the matters that he decided are to be referred to the king, as soon as you have considered them, and send someone promptly, so that we may make proposals appropriate for you. For we are on our way to Antioch. Therefore make haste and send messengers, so that we may have your judgment. Farewell, the 148th, Xanthicus 15th. All right, 2 Maccabees chapter 12. When this agreement had been reached, Lysias returned to the king, and the Jews went about their farming. But some of the governors in various places, Timothy and Apollonius, son of Genius, as well as Hieronymus and Demophon, in addition to these, Nicanor, the governor of Cyprus, would not let them live quietly and in peace. And the people of Joppa did so ungodly a deed as this. They invited the Jews who lived among them to embark with their wives and children on boats that they had provided, as though they were no ill will to the Jews. And this was done by public vote to the city, when they accepted, because they wished to live peaceably and suspected nothing. The people of Joppa took them out to sea and drowned them, at least 200. When Judas heard of the cruelty visited on his compatriots, he gave orders to his men, and calling upon God the righteous judge, attacked the murderers of his kindred. He set fire to the harbor by night, burned the boats, and massacred those who had taken refuge there. Then, because the city's gates were closed, he withdrew, intending to come again and root out the whole community of Joppa. But learning that the people in Jamnia meant in the same way to wipe out the Jews who were living among them, he attacked the Jamnites by night and set fire to the harbor and the fleet, so that the glow of the light was seen in Jerusalem, 30 miles distant. When they had gone more than a mile from there on their march against Timothy, at least 5,000 Arabs with 500 cavalry attacked them. After a hard fight, Judas and his companions, with God's help, were victorious. The defeated nomads begged Judas to grant them pledges of friendship, promising to give him livestock and to help his people in all other ways. Judas, realizing that they might indeed be useful in many ways, agreed to make peace with them, and after receiving his pledges, they went back to their tents. He also attacked a certain town that was strongly fortified with earthworks and walls, and inhabited by all sorts of Gentiles. Its name was Caspin. Those who were within, relying on the strength of the walls and on their supply of provisions, behaved most insolently toward Judas and his men, railing at them and even blaspheming and saying unholy things. But Judas and his men, calling upon the great sovereign of the world, who without battering rams or engines of war overthrew Jericho in the days of Joshua, rushed fiercely upon the walls. They took the town by the will of God and slaughtered untold numbers, so that the adjoining lake, a quarter of a mile wide, appeared to be running over with blood. When they had gone 95 miles from there, they came to Cherix, to the Jews who were called Tobiani. They did not find Timothy in that region, for he had by then left there without accomplishing anything, though in one place he had left a very strong garrison. Dositheus and Sosipater, who were captains under Maccabees, marched out and destroyed those whom Timothy had left in the stronghold, more than 10,000 men. But Maccabees arranged his army in divisions, set men in command of the divisions, and hurried after Timothy, who had with him 120,000 infantry and 2,500 cavalry. When Timothy learned of the approach of Judas, he sent off the women and the children and also the baggage to a place called Carnaim, for that place was hard to besiege and difficult of access because of the narrowness of all the approaches. When Judas's first division appeared, terror and fear came over the enemy at the manifestation to them of him who sees all things. In their flight, they rushed headlong in every direction, so that often they were injured by their own men and pierced by the points of their own swords. Judas pressed the pursuit with the utmost vigor, putting the sinners to the sword, and destroyed as many as 30,000. Timothy himself fell into the hands of Dositheus and Sosipater and their men. With great guile, he begged them to let him go in safety, because he held the parents of most of them, and the brothers of some, to whom no consideration would be shown. But when with many words he had confirmed his solemn promise to restore them unharmed, they let him go for the sake of saving their kindred. Then Judas marched against Carnaim, and the temple of Atargatis, and slaughtered 25,000 people. After the rout and destruction of these, he marched also against Ephraim, a fortified town where Lysias lived, with multitudes of people of all nationalities. Stalwart young men took their stand before the walls and made a vigorous defense, and great stores of war engines and missiles were there. But the Jews called upon the sovereign, who with power shatters the might of his enemies, and they got the town into their hands and killed as many as 25,000 of those who were in it. Setting out from there, they hastened to Scythopolis, which is 75 miles from Jerusalem. But when the Jews who lived there bore witness to the goodwill that the people of Scythopolis had shown them and their kind treatment of them in times of misfortune, they thanked them and exhorted them to be well disposed to their race in the future also. Then they went up to Jerusalem as the festival was close at hand. After the festival called Pentecost, they hurried against Gorgias, the governor of Idumea, who came out with 3,000 infantry and 400 cavalry. When they joined battle, it happened that a few of the Jews fell, but a certain Dositheus, one of the Bassanor's men, who was on horseback and was a strong man, caught hold of Gorgias, and grasping his cloak was dragging him off by main strength, wishing to take the accursed man alive, when one of the Thracian cavalry bore down on him and cut off his arm. So Gorgias escaped and reached Marissa. As Esdras and his men had been fighting for a long time and were weary, Judas called upon the Lord to show himself their ally and leader in the battle. In the language of their ancestors, he raised the battle cry with hymns. Then he charged against Gorgias's troops when they were not expecting it and put them to flight. Then Judas assembled his army and went to the city of Adullam. As the seventh day was coming on, they purified themselves according to the custom and kept the Sabbath there. On the next day, as had now become necessary, Judas and his men went to take up the bodies of the fallen and to bring them back to lie with their kindred in the sepulchres of their ancestors. Then under the tunic of each one of the dead, they found sacred tokens of the idols of Jamnia, which the law forbids the Jews to wear. And it became clear to all that this was the reason these men had fallen. So they all blessed the ways of the Lord, the righteous judge, who reveals the things that are hidden. And they turned to supplication, praying that the sin that had been committed might be wholly blotted out. The noble Judas exhorted the people to keep themselves free from sin, for they had seen with their own eyes what had happened as a result of the sin of those who had fallen. He also took up a collection, man by man, to the amount of 2,000 drachmas of silver, and sent it to Jerusalem to provide for a sin offering. In doing this, he acted very well and honorably, taking account of the resurrection. For if he were not expecting that those who had fallen would rise again, he would have been superfluous and foolish to pray for the dead. But if he was looking to the splendid reward that is laid up for those who fall asleep in godliness, it was a holy and pious thought. Therefore, he made atonement for the dead so that they might be delivered from their sin. 2 Maccabees chapter 13. In the 149th year, word came to Judas and his men that Antiochus Eupator was coming with a great army against Judea, and with him Lysias, his guardian, who had charge of the government. Each of them had a Greek force of 110,000 infantry, 5,300 cavalry, 22 elephants, and 300 chariots armed with scythes. Menelaus also joined them with utter hypocrisy urged Antiochus on, not for the sake of his country's welfare, but because he thought that he would be established in office. But the king of kings aroused the anger of Antiochus against the scoundrel, and when Lysias informed him that this man was to blame for all the trouble, he ordered them to take him to Beroia and to put him to death by the method that is customary in that place. For there is a tower there, 50 cubits high, full of ashes, and it has a rim running around it that on all sides inclines precipitously into the ashes. There they all push to destruction anyone guilty of sacrilege or notorious for other crimes. But such a fate it came about that Menelaus the lawbreaker died without even burial in the earth. And this was eminently just, because he had committed many sins against the altar whose fire and ashes were holy. He met his death in ashes. The king with Barabbas, with barbarous arrogance, was coming to show the Jews things far worse than those that had been done in his father's time. When Judas heard of this, he ordered the people to call upon the Lord day and night, now if ever, to help those who were on the point of being deprived of the law in their country and the holy temple, and not to let the people who had just begun to revive fall into the hands of the blasphemous Gentiles. When they had all joined in the same petition and had implored the merciful Lord with weeping and fasting and lying prostrate for 3 days without ceasing, Judas exhorted them and ordered them to stand ready. After consulting privately with the elders, he determined to march out and decide the matter by the help of God before the king's army could enter Judea and get possession of the city. So, committing the decision to the Creator of the world and exhorting his troops to fight bravely to the death of the lost temple, city, country, and commonwealth, he pitched his camp near Modin. He gave his troops to the watchword, God's victory, and with a picked force of the bravest young men, he attacked the king's pavilion at night and killed as many as 2,000 men in the camp. He stabbed the leading elephant and its rider. In the end, they filled the camp with terror and confusion and withdrew in triumph. This happened just as day was dawning, because the Lord's help protected him. The king, having had a taste of the daring of the Jews, tried strategy in attacking their positions. He advanced against Besser, a strong fortress of the Jews, was turned back, attacked again, and was defeated. Judas sent in to the garrison whatever was necessary. But Rodicus, a man from the ranks of the Jews, gave secret information to the enemy. He was sought for, caught, and put in prison. The king negotiated a second time with the people in Bethzer, gave pledges, received theirs, withdrew, attacked. Judas and his men was defeated. He got word that Philip, who had been left in charge of the government, had revolted in Antioch. He was dismayed, called in the Jews, yielded, and swore to observe all their rights, settled with them, and offered sacrifice, honored the sanctuary, and showed generosity to the holy place. He received Maccabees, left Hegemonides as governor from Palatinus to Gerar, and went to Palatinus. The people of Palatinus were ignorant over the treaty. In fact, they were so angry that they wanted to annul its terms. Lysias took the public platform, made the best possible defense, convinced them, appeased them, gained their goodwill, and set out for Antioch. This is how the king's attack and withdrawal turned out. 2 Maccabees chapter 14. 3 years later, word came to Judas and his men that Demetrius, son of Seleucus, had sailed into the harbor of Tripolis with a strong army and fleet, and had taken possession of the country, having made away with Antiochus and his guardian Lysias. Now, a certain alchemist who had formerly been high priest, but now had willfully defiled himself in the times of separation, realized that there was no way for him to be safe or to have access again to the holy altar, and went to King Demetrius in about the 151st year, presenting to him a crown of gold and a palm, and besides these, some of the customary olive branches from the temple. During that day, he kept quiet, but he found an opportunity that furthered his mad purpose when he was invited by Demetrius to a meeting of the council and was asked about the attitude and intentions of the Jews. He answered, "Those of the Jews who are called Hasidians, whose leader is Judas Maccabees, are keeping up war and stirring up sedition, and will not let the kingdom attain tranquility. Therefore, I have laid aside my ancestral glory, I mean the high priesthood, and have now come here. First, because I am genuinely concerned for the interests of the king, and second, because I have regard also for my compatriots. For through the folly of those whom I have mentioned, our whole nation is now in no small misfortune. Since you are acquainted, O king, with the details of this matter, may it please you to take thought for our country and our hard-pressed nation with the gracious kindness that you show to all. For as long as Judas lives, it is impossible for the government to find peace." When he said this, the rest of the king's friends who were hostile to Judas quickly inflamed Demetrius still more. He immediately chose Nicanor, who had been in command of the elephants, appointed him governor of Judea, and sent him off with orders to kill Judas and scatter his troops, and to install alchemists as high priests of the great temple. And the Gentiles throughout Judea who had fled before Judas flocked to join Nicanor, thinking that the misfortunes and calamities of the Jews would mean prosperity for themselves. When the Jews heard of Nicanor's coming and the gathering of the Gentiles, they sprinkled dust on their heads and prayed to him who established his own people forever and always upholds his own heritage by manifesting himself. At the command of the leader, they set out from there immediately and engaged them in battle at a village called Desal. Simon, the brother of Judas, had encountered Nicanor, but had been temporarily checked because of the sudden consternation created by the enemy. Nevertheless, Nicanor, hearing of the valor of Judas and his troops and the courage in the battle for their country, shrank from deciding the issue by bloodshed. Therefore, he sent Posidonius, Theodotus, and Mattathias to give and receive pledges of friendship. When the terms had been fully considered and the leader had informed the people and it had appeared that they were of one mind, they agreed to the covenant. The leaders set a day on which to meet by themselves. A chariot came forward from each army. Seats of honor were set in place. Judas posted army men in readiness at key places to prevent sudden treachery on the part of the enemy, so they duly held the consultation. Nicanor stayed on in Jerusalem and did nothing out of the way, but dismissed the flocks of people that had gathered. And he kept Judas always in his presence. He was warmly attached to the man. He urged him to marry and have children, so Judas married, settled down, and shared the common life. When alchemists noticed their goodwill for one another, he took the covenant that had been made and went to Demetrius. He told them that Nicanor was disloyal to the government since he had appointed the conspirator against the kingdom, Judas, to be his successor. The king became excited and provoked by the false accusations of that depraved man, wrote to Nicanor stating that he was displeased with the covenant and commanding him to send Maccabees to Antioch as a prisoner without delay. When this message came to Nicanor, he was troubled and grieved that he had to annul their agreement when the man had done no wrong. Since it was not possible to oppose the king, he watched for an opportunity to accomplish this by a stratagem. But Maccabees, noticing that Nicanor was more austere in his dealings with him and was meeting him more rudely than had been his custom, concluded that this austerity did not spring from the best motives. So he gathered not a few of his men and went into hiding from Nicanor. When the latter became aware that he had been cleverly outwitted by the man, he went to the great and holy temple while the priests were offering the customary sacrifices and commanded them to hand the man over. When they declared an oath that they did not know where the man was whom he wanted, he stretched out his right hand toward and swore this oath: if you do not hand Judas over to me as prisoner, I will level this shrine of God to the ground, tear down the altar, and build here a splendid temple to Dionysus. Having said this, he went away. Then the priests stretched out their hands toward heaven and called upon the constant defender of our nation in these words: O Lord of all, though you have need of nothing, you were pleased that there should be a temple for your habitation among us. So now, O Holy One, Lord of all holiness, keep undefiled forever this house that has been so recently purified. A certain Razes, one of the elders of Jerusalem, was denounced to Nicanor as a man who loved his compatriots and was very well thought of, and for his goodwill was called Father of the Jews. In former times, when there was no mingling with the Gentiles, he had been accused of Judaism and had been most zealously risked body and life for Judaism. Nicanor, wishing to exhibit the enmity that he had for the Jews, sent more than 500 soldiers to arrest him, for he thought that by arresting him he would do them an injury. When the troops were about to capture the tower and were forcing the door of the courtyard, they ordered that fire be brought and the doors burned. Being surrounded, Razes fell upon his own sword, preferring to die nobly rather than to fall into the hands of sinners and suffer outrages unworthy of his noble birth. But in the heat of the struggle, he did not hit exactly, and the crowd was now rushing in through the doors. He courageously ran up on the wall and bravely threw himself down into the crowd. But as they quickly drew back, a space opened, and he fell in the middle of the empty space. Still alive and aflame with anger, he rose, and though his blood gushed forth and his wounds were severe, he ran through the crowd, and standing upon a steep rock, with his blood now completely drained from him, he tore out his entrails, took them in both hands, and hurled them at the crowd, calling upon the Lord of life and spirit to give them back to him again. This was the manner of his death. In the last chapter of 2 Maccabees, chapter 15. When Nicanor heard that Judas and his troops were in the region of Samaria, he made plans to attack them with complete safety on the day of rest. When the Jews who were compelled to follow him said, "Do not destroy so savagely and barbarously, but show respect for the day that he who sees all things has honored and hallowed above other days," the thrice accursed wretch asked if there were a sovereign in heaven who had commanded the keeping of the Sabbath day. When they declared, "It is the living Lord himself, the sovereign in heaven, who ordered us to observe the seventh day," he replied, "But I am a sovereign also on earth, and I command you to take up arms and finish the king's business." Nevertheless, he did not succeed in carrying out his abominable design. This Nicanor, in his utter boastfulness and arrogance, had determined to erect a public monument of victory over Judas and his forces. But Maccabeus did not cease to trust with all confidence that he would get help from the Lord. He exhorted his troops not to fear the attack of the Gentiles, but to keep in mind the former times when help had come to them from heaven, and so to look for the victory that the Almighty would give them. Encouraging them from the law and the prophets, and reminding them also of the struggles they had won, he made them the more eager. When he had aroused their courage, he issued his orders at the same time, pointing out the perfidy of the Gentiles and their violation of oaths. He armed each of them not so much with confidence in shields and spears as with the inspiration of the brave words, and he cheered them all by relating a dream, a sort of vision which was worthy of belief. What he saw was this: Onias, who had been high priest, a noble and good man, of modest bearing and gentle manner, one who spoke fittingly and had been trained from childhood in all that belongs to excellence, was praying with outstretched hands for the whole body of the Jews. Then in the same fashion another appeared, distinguished by his gray hair and dignity and of the marvelous majesty and authority. And Onias spoke, saying, "This is a man who loves the family of Israel and prays much for the people in the holy city, Jeremiah the prophet of God." Jeremiah stretched out his right hand and gave to Judas a golden sword, and as he gave it, he addressed him thus: "Take this holy sword, a gift from God, with which you will strike down your adversaries." Encouraged by the words of Judas, so noble and so effective in arousing valor and waking courage in the souls of the young, they determined not to carry on a campaign, but to attack bravely, and to decide the matter by fighting hand to hand, with all courage, because the city, the sanctuary, and the temple were in danger. Their concern for wives and children, and also for brothers and sisters and relatives, lay upon them less heavily. Their greatest and first fear was for the consecrated sanctuary, and those who had to remain in the city were in no little distress, being anxious over the encounter in the open country. When all were now looking forward to the coming issue and the enemy was already close at hand with their army drawn up for battle, the elephants strategically stationed and the cavalry deployed on the flanks. Maccabees, observing the masses that were in front of him and the varied supply of arms and the savagery of the elephants, stretched out his hands toward heaven and called upon the Lord who works wonders. For he knew that it is not by arms, but as the Lord decides, that he gains the victory of those who deserve it. He calls upon him in these words, O Lord, who set your angel in the time of King Hezekiah of Judea. And he killed fully 185,000 in the camp of Sennacherib. So now, O sovereign of the heavens, send a good angel to spread terror and trembling before us. By the might of your arm, may these blasphemers who come against your holy people be struck down. With these words, he ended his prayer. Nicanor and his troops advanced with trumpets and battle songs, but Judas and his troops met the enemy in battle with invocations to God and prayers. So fighting with their hands and praying to God in their hearts, they laid low at least 35,000 and were greatly gladdened by God's manifestation. When the action was over and they were returning with joy, they recognized Nicanor lying dead in full armor. Then there was shouting and tumult, and they blessed the sovereign Lord in the language of their ancestors. Then the man who was ever in body and soul, the defender of his people, the man who maintained his youthful goodwill toward his compatriots, ordered them to cut off Nicanor's head and arm and carry them to Jerusalem. When he arrived there and had called his compatriots together and stationed the priests before the altar, he sent for those who were in the citadel. He showed them the vile Nicanor's head and that profane man's arm, which had been boastfully stretched out against the holy house of the Almighty. He cut out the tongue of the ungodly Nicanor and said that he would feed it piecemeal to the birds and would hang up these rewards of his folly opposite the sanctuary. And they all, looking to heaven, blessed the Lord who had manifested himself, saying, Blessed is he who has kept his own place undefiled. Judas hung Nicanor's head from the citadel, a clear and conspicuous sign to everyone of the help of the Lord. And they all decreed, but by public vote, never to let this day go unobserved, but to celebrate the 13th day of the 12th month, which is called Adar, in the Aramaic language, the day before Mordecai's day. This, then, is how matters turned out with Nicanor, and from that time the city has been in the possession of the Hebrews. So I will here end my story, if it is well told and to the point, that is what I myself desired. If it is poorly done, I am mediocre. That was the best I could do. For just as it is harmful to drink wine alone, or again to drink water alone, while wine mixed with water is sweet and delicious and enhances one's enjoyment, so also the style of the story delights the ears of those who read the work. And here will be the end. All right, guys, that's it for Second Maccabees. Thanks for watching/listening. All right, bye.